Hey everyone. So I wanted to make this video to talk about a character who I feel has an unfairly negative reputation, and that would be Cyclops from the X-Men. Cyclops typically gets called either a boring character or a jerk, and I don't think those are fair descriptions of his character. Now, I will be talking about the classic version of Cyclops, before he was deconstructed into the character who killed Professor Xavier. While he was under the influence of the Phoenix Force when he did that, it was still a mistake in writing to have him do it, and I think it's a complete betrayal of what he used to be. So, first, there's the criticism that Scott's a jerk, which I think is a misinterpretation of his personality. He's uptight, stubborn, and strict, but that doesn't make him a jerk. He just has a no-nonsense attitude about things because he takes what he does seriously and he wants the X-Men to be an efficiently working team. Also, when you look at his past, having grown up in an orphanage where he was bullied and never adopted, it makes sense that he's a bit socially inept compared to the other X-Men. That's also interesting when you look at the evolution version of the character, who seems to be more easygoing than his comic counterpart, so it's possible that version of him didn't have it as rough. Anyway, despite Scott's uptight attitude, he is a very good person at his core, and there is a scene in God Loves, Man Kills that I think perfectly sums up the person he's meant to be. At the end of the story, Xavier's spirit has been so broken by what's happened that he's actually ready to join Magneto, but Scott stops him with his great speech. He says, "I won't accept that, Charles. Granted, times are tough for us, and they'll probably get a lot worse. Granted, we probably could conquer the world, though the cost in blood would be staggering. But don't you see, either of you, we're human too, a different branch perhaps, but the same basic tree. Such a fundamental shift in attitude can't be imposed. To have any meaning, it must grow from within. You brought us together to fulfill a dream, Charles, one born out of hope and the noblest of human aspirations, and we've sweated and bled, and some of us have died to make it a reality. I'm not prepared to give up. The means are as important as the end. We have to do this right or not at all. Anything less negates every belief we've ever had, every sacrifice we've ever made." And after that, Xavier, he declines Magneto's offer, and he says to the X-Men, "I feel so ashamed," and Scott says, "To be proven only human, as flawed and vulnerable as the rest of us, where's the shame in that?" I really love that scene. I think it's a really good representation of who Scott Summers really is, or who he was before he was, deconstructed at his core. So now for the belief that he's a boring character, which I also very much disagree with. I think the concept of his character is very interesting for one thing. He has all this destructive power within him, and he has to constantly keep it in check, otherwise he could destroy everything he sees. I think the book X-Men Season 1 did a really good job with this idea, showing that he was so afraid of using his power that he screws up on the team's first mission, and so after that he devotes himself to pushing past those fears so he can be a better leader, training constantly in the danger room to improve himself. His role as team leader, I think, is also an interesting part of his character, especially when you look at the early Claremont stuff and how he dealt with the new team when he was, at first, the only remaining member of the original. You see him struggle with getting the new team to work together, face his own doubts on if he can even properly lead them, and you see him push through that and not let those doubts stop him from doing what he has to. Another interesting thing about his character is the way he handled his conflict with Wolverine. Now, Wolverine is a fantastic character, and this isn't a knock against him, but you have to think in the context of he's on this team and Cyclops is the leader. And when he steps out of line, Cyclops doesn't just let him do whatever. No, he asserts his position as the leader of the team. And think about how terrifying Wolverine would be to stand up to. He's got the unbreakable claws that can cut through anything, the healing factor, the berserker rage, and Xavier was well aware that he'd taken on the Hulk, so you can assume Scott knew that too. And yet, with all that, he never backed down from him. He kept the attitude of, I'm the leader, and on this team you'll follow my orders, and if you've got a problem with that, you can settle it with me. There's also the love triangle with Jean, in which Scott didn't just let Wolverine take his girlfriend, he stood his ground there too. He never cowered away in fear from him, and that's actually what made Logan start to respect him eventually. The big moment where that happened would be in the Proteus storyline. Proteus had reality warping powers, and he used it on Wolverine and really messed him up. Logan was just completely thrown off, and he was just shivering in fear. And Cyclops saw this and he said, I can't just leave him like this. For Wolverine to lose his fighting spirit, that'd be a fate worse than death. So he intentionally gets Logan angry to get him in a berserker rage to snap him out of it. And you see Scott hold his own against Wolverine. You see that he can take him on in a fight and not just get massacred instantly. And he brings the other members of the X-Men that had fought Proteus into it just to make sure that they're okay too. And then, once the fight calms down, he explains everything. He had Jean read his mind so that, she would know what the plan was and could back him up. And so after all that, Wolverine was really impressed with how Scott had handled it. He says, "You took a heck of a risk starting this fracas, boss. At the end, I wasn't joshing, I was in a killing mood, almost crazy mad. I ain't thought much of you in the past, Psych, as a team leader or as a man. I was wrong." And that was really one of the best moments for Cyclops in the comics, because you could see his leadership ability, you could see his ability as a tactician, that he can take someone like Wolverine on in a fight and hold his own, and it's the moment where Wolverine starts to actually respect him. Now, there have been some bad decisions made with Cyclops in the comics, even before the whole thing of him killing Xavier, like how he handled his relationship with Madeline prior, or when Emma Frost came into the picture. So I want to go over my views on those controversies. First, with Madeline, she was a clone of Jean Grey, who, after Jean's death in the Phoenix Saga, Scott married. He didn't know she was a clone, and it was originally supposed to be that she just had a haunting resemblance to her. But anyway, they had a son, and Scott left the X-Men to take care of his family. Then when Jean came back, he left them, and this has been used to say that he's a terrible person a lot over the years. Now here's the thing. I don't hold it against his character because it was bad writing. You have to understand what was going on behind the scenes. Scott was supposed to stay retired, but editorial brought him back because of the X Factor book, which reunited the original X-Men. So this plot contrivance was created that Scott and Madeline were having trouble in their relationship because he was still in love with Jean, even though he had been shown already to have moved on and was happy with Madeline. So now, when he gets a phone call that Jean's back, he just up and leaves to go see her. He doesn't hook up with her, though, he just wanted to see her. But it was still pretty messed up to just up and leave like that. Now, if you look at the issues that followed, he didn't just forget about his wife and son. He felt terrible about what he did. He tried calling Madeline, but she had taken off with the baby, and no one knew where they were. All he wanted was to go find Madeline and fix things, but he had to stay with X Factor, so he was just miserable through all of that. Then Madeline turned evil and Scott just got back with Jean. The whole thing was a mess. It was a badly written plot contrivance, and it's a stain on Scott's character, but it doesn't completely destroy him. The problem is, years later, they made another boneheaded decision with him in the comics. They had him cheat on Jean with Emma Frost. Some people don't consider it cheating because they never physically had sex. It only happened in their minds, but I count it as cheating. The reason it happened was because Scott had been taken over by Apocalypse and was still dealing with the effects of it, so he went to Emma for therapy and it ended up turning into a psychic affair. It was dumb and legitimately frustrates me. I firmly believe the only reason this happened is the same reason One More Day happened. Spider-Man made a deal with Mephisto because Marvel Editorial didn't want him married anymore, and they had Scott cheat on Jean for the controversy and to end the marriage. The thing that's even more stupid about it is that shortly after it happened, they killed Jean. So why couldn't they just kill Jean first and then have Scott get with Emma? That's exactly the way the X-Men anime did it. Yes, there was an X-Men anime. It's pretty obscure, but it's pretty good. In that series, Jean dies, and we see a depressed and angry Scott deal with the aftermath. Then Emma comes into the picture, and we see them slowly develop a relationship as she helps him cope with it all. I will never understand why they couldn't just do it that way in the comics to begin with, instead of destroying Cyclops' reputation. Also, in the Wolverine and the X-Men animated series, while I'm not too fond of how Scott's written in that show since he's far too reckless, I appreciate that he stays devoted to Jean. She goes missing, and finding her is all he can think about because he's in love with her. It doesn't matter that he's got Emma right there and she's hot and interested in him. Jean is who he cares about. Now, there was still some good stuff with Cyclops in the comics after that whole thing. Pretty much all of how he was written in Astonishing X-Men. But it really damages his character moving forward. I guess you can say, he had been affected by Apocalypse and he wasn't really himself when he did it. It's still just... It's gross. It's disgusting. I don't like it. I hate the fact that they did that to him, that they had him do something like that. Really wish they had done it differently, but what can you do? Overall, I still love Cyclops as he should be. Like I said, the classic version of the character. I think, the Claremont era is the height of that. When I think of Cyclops during the Claremont era, that's who I think of. That's really the character to me. Uptight and serious guy, but a good person nonetheless, who wants to make the world a better place. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm just going to end up rambling if I keep going. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are you a fan of Cyclops? Did you hate him, and did I change your mind? If so, I'd love to know that. If I didn't change your mind and you still hate him, that's okay too. But I do appreciate you hearing me out. So, thank you for watching, and you guys have a good day.